Thanks everyone for joining us for this Ucat 2021 overview. In this talk, you get to ask the official Ucat team any questions. This is a 30-minute presentation and it will provide an overview of the University Clinical Aptitude Test, including test content and timings, key dates for 2021, bursaries and access arrangements, how to book the test, scoring and marking, how to prepare for the test, and how to use your Ucat results. So I'm just going to pass it on to you now, and I hope you guys enjoy this.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. My name is Esther. I'm from Ucat, and I'm just going to share my screen so we can start on today's presentation. Okay. Hopefully you can all see this now. So let's walk through the important things you need to know about the Ucat for 2021. So this is what we'll cover today. What is the Ucat? Which universities use it? Key dates that you need to be aware of, how to register and book. I'll talk you through some important things like bursaries and access arrangements that you need to be aware of. And then we'll look at the test format itself, each of the 5 subtests and how it's scored. The bit you're probably most interested in is how to prepare for the test, so I'll talk about that. And then we'll look at what happens on test day and how you obtain your results, and more importantly, what you do once you've got your Ucat score. Sorry. There we go. So as you're aware, the Ucat is an admissions test. It's mandatory. It's one of 2 in the UK. So there's the Ucat and the BMAT. And which admissions test you decide to sit is really driven by which universities you want to apply to. So there's 31 UK universities that use the Ucat and require the Ucat. And I think there's about 7 that require the BMAT. And they are at different times of the year, so if you wanted to take both, depending on how you're spreading your Ucat applications, you are able to do that. You would sit the test at the end of year 12. So when you, over the summer, before you submit your Ucat application in October and go into year 13, that's when you need to sit the Ucat. So it's the year before you actually start university. You can only sit the test once each year, and it's a 2-hour multiple choice computer-based test. It's sat at a Pearson VUE test centre, so there's around 150 throughout the UK. So hopefully you shouldn't have to travel too far to find your nearest test centre. The Ucat's different to the BMAT in that there's no curriculum content. Our universities feel that that's assessed elsewhere in things like your academic studies. So it's testing other things like mental abilities and skills that our universities believe are important for being successful doctors and dentists. This is a list of the Ucat universities. You don't have to remember this, it's on the Ucat website. So basically, if you're planning on applying to any of these to study medicine or dentistry, then you need to sit the Ucat this year, if you're in year 12. And these are the key dates for 2021. So registration and booking have already opened. If it's the first you've just found out about it, don't worry, you've still got plenty of time though. Testing takes place between the 26th of July and the 29th of September. So you've got a 2-month test window that you can choose when you want to sit your test. So it's quite flexible. But by the 22nd of September, we would expect all candidates ready to have booked their test slot. And there's only a week left of testing then. So you need to get organised and book a suitable test slot. The good thing about the Ucat is that you get your score before you submit your Ucat application, which is on the 15th of October this year. There is a fee associated with sitting the test, which is £75 for UK candidates. However, we do offer Ucat Bursaries. So if you are classed as in financial need, there's quite a wide eligibility criteria. So it could be if you're receiving the 16 to 19 bursary or free school meals or EMA, or if your parents are in receipt of any of the benefits listed there. Have a look at the bursary scheme page of our website. You can apply for a bursary really simply using the online form, and then we will send you a bursary voucher that you can use to pay for your test. Access arrangements. So if you currently receive extra time in school or college, or rest breaks or any other accommodations for your exams that you need, we can usually mirror this within the Ucat. The most common of which is the Ucat Sen, which is 25% extra, but there are different versions of the test. So hopefully we should be able to meet your needs. If you think you need these, have a look at the access arrangements page of our website. Everything's explained on there, and again, it's quite a simple online form. You just upload your evidence of eligibility, and hopefully we should be able to approve the correct test for you. So let's look at the format of the Ucat now. There are 5 cognitive subtests: verbal reasoning, decision making, quantitative reasoning, and abstract reasoning. These are followed by a 5th non-cognitive subtest of situational judgment, or as it's more commonly known, SJT. So if I slip into a bit of jargon during the session and say SJT, this is what I'm talking about. It's a situational judgment subtest. So we'll look at each subtest in turn now. So the first one is verbal reasoning. You have 21 minutes to answer 44 questions. And you'll be presented with 11 passages of text, and they could be about a wide variety of subjects. And then associated with each passage, you'll see 4 questions. You don't need any prior knowledge of the subject matter, but what this is assessing is your ability to draw conclusions, look for key information, dismiss irrelevant or distracting information, and draw the correct conclusion quite quickly. So if we have a look at one here, this is kind of what the live test looks like. So if you've not had a look at the question banks or the practice tests on our website yet, this is what the live Ucat test looks like. So for verbal reasoning, you can see the passage on the left, and then the question stem and the answer responses are on the right-hand side. So it is multiple choice. There's no negative marking within the Ucat. So if you make a wrong guess, you don't get any marks deducted. So it's always worth putting an answer, otherwise you are missing a mark, really. What's quite challenging is the speed at which you need to move through the subtest. So it is have a look at the stem, and I would say look for key words and then try and find them in the passage fairly quickly. The second subtest is decision making. So slightly longer on each question in this one, 31 minutes to answer 29 questions. And this is looking at your ability to apply logic to reach a decision or conclusion. So it's analysing statistical information and evaluating arguments. And there's quite a wide variety of question types within the decision-making subtest. So you might see logical puzzles, syllogisms, Venn diagrams, and other question types. They're standalone, each question, and you are provided with a whiteboard and marker pen at the test centre. So when you get there, you'll get, it's kind of like a white laminated sheet, and you can use that to make notes, and you might find that quite useful in this subtest. And here's an example of a decision-making question. So they are all multiple choice. Some of them have just one single correct answer. So you might be faced with 4 or 5 response options and there's just one correct answer. Others are these sort of drag and drop type questions. So you would need to drag yes or no whether the conclusion follows the statement above. And for these, you can pick up partial marks. So if you don't get it fully correct, but you're partially correct, you can still pick up some marks. That's quite important to remember. The third subtest is quantitative reasoning. So although there's no curriculum content as such in the Ucat, this is probably the closest to sort of GCSE maths. So the standard of maths is not too high. It's about a GCSE maths level C. If you're not studying maths at the moment at A level, that's fine. Maybe dig out your GCSE notebooks and brush up on some aspects such as ratios, percentages, averages, and fractions. Those are kind of the key areas that you will see repeating in a lot of the Ucat questions in this subtest. But it's not really testing your math skills. It's about using your numerical skills to solve problems. That's what we're looking at. You are provided with a calculator. There's an inbuilt calculator within the test. You can't take your own handheld calculator in. So it's worth getting used to that when you're practicing in the question banks and the practice tests, so that you know your way around the calculator, you're familiar with it, and you're not wasting time in the live test. I would say though, brushing up on your mental maths, or if you can download a mental maths app and just sort of try and hone that skill a bit more, you can save yourself some time as well. So a combination of probably using the calculator where you need to and using your mental maths where you can is probably the quickest way to move through this subtest. And here's an example question. This is quite simple table, and then you will have a multiple choice question after it. It might be a table, it might be a chart, it might be a graph, it might be a large passage with lots of figures and things in it. So it can vary question to question. In this subtest, obviously, there only is one correct answer per question. As I mentioned, you can use the calculator. If you're running out of time, strategies to sort of speed up, you might be able to discount one or two of the answers that you know aren't correct and make your best guess from the answers remaining and move on. So it's about managing your time throughout the UCAT. You really need to do that carefully. If you're spending too long on a question, make your best guess. You can flag it. There's a flag for review tool in the top right-hand corner. So you can do that and come back to it at the end of the subtest if you have time. The fourth subtest is abstract reasoning. So this is looking at your ability to spot patterns or rules amongst abstract sets of shapes. There might be irrelevant or distracting information, so you need to sort of change track, test hypotheses, and work out the correct rule fairly swiftly. It's quite a time-pressured subtest, so you have just 13 minutes to answer 55 questions. There's a number of different question types in this subtest, but we'll have a look at one here. So in this question type, you're presented with two sets of shapes, set A and set B, and you need to work out what is the rule for each of those sets. So if we look at set A, what links all the boxes in set A? What's the common rule? Then you need to work out what is the common rule or what links all the boxes in set B, and then you'll be presented with a series of test shapes. So although there's like basically about 15 seconds per question, you don't have that on the first one really. So you need to think, once you've worked out the rule for the first set of shapes, you'll be able to answer which group the test shape belongs to. So is it set A, set B, or neither? And then you'll be presented with another 3 test shapes associated with this same set of shapes. So you will get a lot quicker on those last 3 once you've worked out the rule. When I say rules, it could be something like, is it the type of shape? So is it a triangle or a square or a circle? Is it the shading of the shapes that is the common factor? Is it the number of the shapes? Is it their positioning in the box? In terms of number as well, it could be the number of shapes. It could be the number of sides of each of the shapes in the box. It could be the number of right angles. It could be where they are touching the sides of the box or the intersections, things like that. There's lots of different things it could be. Don't be thrown when you first start looking at this. It can seem quite daunting, but the key to this subtest really is doing lots and lots of practice questions. So the more practice questions you do, the more familiar you will be at spotting these patterns. You'll be able to run through the list fairly swiftly, discount the ones that you don't think are correct, and find the correct solution. So the key really is doing lots and lots of practice questions here. Okay, so we move on. The final subtest is situational judgment. Oh, sorry, just going back to the abstract reasoning. If you are really struggling, have a look at our question tutorial. So on the Ucat website, under the Prepare tab, there are question tutorials for each of the 5 subtests. So they will run through the different question types within the subtest, give you an example to work through, and give you tips and strategies for how to tackle them. So that they're really useful. So if you're struggling, have a look at those before you kind of dive into the question banks. There's also some great free resources on YouTube. So if you have a look, there's lots of videos of past candidates kind of working through abstract reasoning questions. They give you some really useful mnemonics for remembering the different types of rules, like shape, sides, shading, number, angle, etc. So there's some quite good mnemonics to help you remember that. You get 1 minute in between each subtest, so you can use that minute at the start of abstract reasoning to kind of jot down those rules to remind yourself on your whiteboard as you're running through the subtest. You might find that quite useful. Okay, sorry, so moving on to situational judgment. So this is the non-cognitive subtest, and it's quite different from the others, and it's scored differently from the other subtests. So this is about assessing your capacity to understand real-world situations and scenarios and the appropriate behaviour in dealing with them. This is assessing key traits that our universities believe are essential to becoming successful doctors and dentists. So to be successful in a clinical career, Key traits like integrity, perspective taking, team involvement, resilience, adaptability, communication, honesty, those are really important. So the SJTs are assessing those aspects, and they're used quite widely in medical selection. So for in courses for foundation doctors and GPs, and also lots of other areas of recruitment are now using SJTs, situational judgment tests, quite frequently as well. This subtest is kind of a bit less time pressured, so most candidates do get through all questions in the SJT. So you've got 26 minutes to answer 69 questions, but as I say, most people do find that quite manageable. We'll have a look now at a situational judgment test question type. So it looks a little bit like the verbal reasoning in terms of the layout of the questions, but that's really where the similarity ends. So you'll have a scenario on the left-hand side. It could be set in a hospital, at a university, or somewhere completely different. And then you'll be asked the question stem on the right-hand side. So associated with each scenario, you can have anywhere between 2 and 6 questions associated with the same scenario. So in this case, it's asking how appropriate a certain course of action is by one of the people within the scenario. And you've got 4 response options here. So a very appropriate thing to do, appropriate but not ideal, inappropriate but not awful, or a very inappropriate thing to do. You get full marks if you get the answer right. If you get the answer close to correct, you can also pick up some partial marks. So it's always worth having an attempt. As I've mentioned, there's some different question types. Excuse me. For some of them, you may be asked the appropriateness of something, or for others, it might be the importance, how important is a certain thing to consider. There might be 4 response options to choose from, or there might just be 2. And in another question type, you're given a number of response options and you're asked to rank them in terms of which is the most important and which is the least important, or the most appropriate or least appropriate. So you're kind of ranking the responses in order of priority. Okay, so those are the 5 subtests that make up the Ucat. The bit you're probably most interested in is how you should prepare. So you might hear people say that you can't revise for the Ucat because there's no academic knowledge in there, and that's just rubbish, to be honest. So you really do need to prepare for this test. And the best way to prepare is lots and lots of practice questions to familiarise yourself with the test. So we would say at least 4 to 6 weeks before your test date, start your revision. And our high scoring candidates kind of said they spent at least 25 to 30 hours preparing for the test. So maybe start at half an hour a day, just trying a couple of questions from each of the different subtests, and then build that up to maybe to an hour a day. And then when you do the time to practice test, it will obviously be a bit longer. So if you have a look at the prepare page of the Ucat website, there's lots of free official resources on there to help you prepare for the test. There's videos, there's a preparation plan, a tour tutorial that runs through the functions of the computer-based test, so how you move through the test and use the flag and review function. There's the question tutorials that I've already mentioned that would help you understand the different question types and how to approach them. And then there's also the Ucat question bank. So there's over 1,000 free practice questions for you to use. So I would start with those and then move on to the practice tests. So we provide you with 4 fully timed practice tests that mimic the live test. So obviously when you do one of those, that's going to take you about 2 hours to go through one. I wouldn't jump straight in with the practice test. You might sort of scare yourself a bit if you don't score very well. So at the end of the practice test, you'll be able to see how many you've got correct, incorrect, or partially correct. So I would maybe do a couple of weeks preparation and then try a practice test. And that will help you see where you need to improve in terms of timing. So how many of the questions did you get through in that subtest, and where do you need to speed up? And how can you manage your time more effectively? So then maybe wait another week, do some more practice questions, and then try a second subtest and keep going until the day of your test. We always get asked, do we recommend any commercial companies? Places like there's Medify, Medic Portal, Medic Life, there's lots and lots of different ones. And our official answer is no, we don't. You know, we provide plenty of free practice materials on the Ucat website. We fundamentally don't believe that candidates should have to pay to prepare for the test. So that's why we try to provide enough free resources. That's not to say that some of these companies aren't very good, and some of their materials and their courses might be excellent, but we don't have any affiliation with them. So we've got no control over the quality of the questions or how they work out the scoring or how accurate that is. So we can't really recommend any at all. If you're looking for other resources, if you get through all the questions on the Ucat website, a lot of these companies kind of put some free materials on their sites as well to kind of tempt you in. So have a look at what's free first and use some extra practice questions. Have a look on YouTube for tutorials. There's loads of good free resources out there. Okay. And some final tips for the test. I think I've covered some of these. So practicing the test timings is really crucial. Don't leave blanks, there's no negative marking. So if you leave a question blank, you are just throwing a mark away. So even if you're struggling or if you're running out of time, pop an answer down, flag it for review. And the flag and review tool works that if you flag a question, if you've got time at the end of that subtest, say you've got 1 or 2 minutes left at the end of the test, you can go back in the review screen and have a look at any questions that you flagged. So if there's one you weren't sure about, or a few you've sort of skipped over, and you just whacked a quick answer down and guessed and moved on because you know you were sort of spending too much time on it, then you can go back and have a look at those at the end if you have time. The reason I would say always put an answer down is because if you do run out of time and you don't have time to go back and look at the review screen and go back over those questions, at least you've put an answer down. Okay. I think I've mentioned don't jump straight into the practice tests. Other tips, it's really important to understand if you're getting questions wrong in the questions banks and during the live test, why you've got them wrong. So in each of the question banks and the practice test, there are answer rationales. So that will explain the answer. And it's really important to read those, I think, so you understand where did you go wrong, you know, did you misunderstand something, or particularly for the situational judgment test, why is your thinking off, you know, what point were you missing? So how did they want you to answer? So it's really important to read those. Just on the situational judgment test as well, it's one of those subtests people either sort of love it or hate it. I think some candidates find it, you know, that's one of the easiest subtests, and other people really struggle with it. So if you are struggling with it, some of our high scoring candidates really recommend the GMC's guidelines on good medical practice. You don't have to remember that. I think we mentioned that in the SJT question tutorial as well. You can just Google it. So the Good Medical Council's guidelines on the General Medical Council's guidelines on good medical practice, you can just Google it. And that kind of runs through what it means to be a doctor and what's important, and the kind of ethics and behaviours and importance of certain things like, you know, honesty, integrity, putting the patient first, confidentiality, things like that. And if you give that a read, I think that's quite useful when we then start looking at some situational judgment questions. So now to look at results. So for each of the 4 cognitive subtests, you will get a score of between 300 and 900 for each of those 4 subtests. And that comprises your total score between 1,200 and 3,600. And then you get a banding for the situational judgment test. So band 1 is the highest, band 4 is the lowest. So there's 2 aspects to your Ucat score. There's no pass or fail mark, you know, so you can't fail the Ucat, but obviously you can get a lower score or a higher score. Results are available on the day of your test. So as you leave the test centre, you'll be given your score reports. So you'll know instantly how well you've done, how well you've performed. The scoring is pretty static across test cycles. So last year's average score was 2511. And you can see the last few years' test statistics on our website if you're interested. What we also do is about the middle of September, when we've had enough candidates basically sit the test to do an accurate prediction, we will issue some interim results. So that will tell you what the current average is across the candidate population who've sat the test so far, and also rough deciles, what we think the deciles are going to be. So at that point, you'll kind of know roughly where your score is sitting amongst this year's cohort. Within a few days of the end of testing, so by very early October, we will release the final test statistics. So that will be, you'll be able to see the average score And there's a handy percentile calculator on the test statistics page of the website. So you can put your score in and it will tell you exactly what percentile you're ranked in. That's quite useful. That's important to look at. So where you are is quite important to look at. And that's because all our universities use the UCAT score in different ways. So for some of them, it might be quite a prominent part of the admissions process, how they decide who to offer interviews to. And for other, it might be of less significance. So they might have portioned more weight to the MMI scores or to your academic grades, and others might put more weight on the UCAT scores than they do on some of those aspects. So it's important to understand that. Some of our universities have thresholds, so although there is no pass-fail mark, a university might impose a threshold. So they will say if you score between, we will welcome applicants who score over 2,600, say. If your score is below that, there is absolutely no point in applying to that university because you won't be offered an interview. So that's really important to understand. You'd be wasting an application. Some universities don't interview candidates who've got a band 4, so the lowest band on the situational judgment test. Other universities don't use the SJT at all. So just because certain doors might be closed, if your score is perhaps not quite as high as you hoped it was, there might still be lots of doors that are open to you, and it's important to do that research to understand that. So once you've sat your UCAT and you're having a look at universities and you think you know where you might like to apply to, have a look at the entry requirements pages of their website, and they will all explain basically how they select for interview and how they use the UCAT score. So that's really important to understand. And that is the end of the presentation. I'm just trying to think of other things that it's important for you to know this year. If you've got any older brothers and sisters, or you know anybody who sat the test last year, you may be aware that we did offer the UCAT online at home for last year's cohort of candidates. And that was obviously because of COVID and local lockdowns and some test centres being closed. The majority of candidates did actually choose still to test in a test centre, but the option was there to test at home. We're not offering that option this year, so all our test centres are currently open and we're anticipating them staying open for the duration of the test cycle. And we believe that's the best way for people to sit the test. So both in terms of, for us, in terms of the test security, the test is designed to be delivered, downloaded at a test centre. And also I think for candidate experience, it's better to be in a properly invigilated environment where there's people on hand that can help you if you have an issue. Also, we saw quite a few issues last year where candidates, they might see some lagging within the test if their internet strength wasn't high enough, or if their internet's dropped out entirely. We had quite a few people who had to abandon their tests and retake them. So this year it will be delivered in test centres. Okay, and I'm just going to stop sharing my screen now. There we go. I think that's everything that I can cover. I'm just looking. So there is a Q&A function here. We've still got 15 minutes left of the session. So if you can see the Q&A button there, I think if you're seeing it like I'm seeing it, I'm not sure how you're seeing it as attendees. I'm seeing it obviously as a speaker. But if you go to the Q&A function and come down to the support hub and pick this time slot, so 2 to 2:45, click on that, and then you can access the Q&A field for this session. So if anybody can figure that out and wants to ask any questions, please feel free.
So there have been some questions on the chat
Great.
function. On the
chat function. Okay. Okay.
You covered a few of them, but if you'd like to have a look at that, and now
brilliant.
everyone.
Thank you. So what would you suggest you should do if your question bank scores remain stagnant? Okay. So if you're doing the practice test, we don't provide you with a score. It's kind of impossible for us to do that within the practice test because of how the differences in how the questions are spread and how the live test is calibrated. So Within each practice test, you will see how many you've got correct, incorrect, or partially correct. Hopefully that will improve as you go through. If it's not improving and it's remaining stagnant, you need to see really where you're falling down. So is there a particular subtest you're struggling with? Obviously focus on those subtests that you are struggling with. So if you know you're doing really well at quantitative reasoning or verbal reasoning, yeah, it's great to keep doing a couple of practice questions, but there's no point keeping revising over that, just if you're already getting on fine with it. So focus on the ones you're struggling with. If you haven't looked at the question tutorials, maybe try looking at those and see if there's some question types you're struggling with. If it's that you're not getting through all the questions, then it's the timing you really need to work on. So there are strategies you can use to try and improve your speed at which you work through the questions. So I think I mentioned in terms of the verbal reasoning, those passages are quite wordy. It's quite difficult to skim read them and actually take anything in, even if you're really good at speed reading. So you maybe try different tactics. So try looking at the question, picking out keywords, and then trying to zone in on those keywords within the question stem. For others, like subtests where there's lots of different question types, like decision making, I interviewed quite a high scoring candidate, and he had quite an unusual approach to it, which I've not heard before, but I thought I'd share that. So he worked out which questions he was really best at. So whether it was syllogisms or Venn diagrams or certain question types, he knew he was stronger and he was quicker on than others. So he would go through and answer all those first and flag the other types, and then come back to them at the end. So he knew he'd kind of ace those first questions, and then the ones he found trickier or he thought would be more time consuming, he left those to the end. So trying strategies like that, making sure you're really disciplined with your time, that if you are spending too much time on a question, make a guess, flag it, and move on. Don't get bogged down on a question. So there are strategies that you can try and sort of boost your score. It's about working through the test smarter in some ways. Okay. So where can you access this recording? So I'm sure the events team can let you know that. If you want to change your test date and time, can you only rebook from available slots? Yes, so that's a really good question, actually. So when you've created your Ucat account and you go in, you will be able to see the live test slots, different test centres and where you can book. It will show available slots. You may have ended up booking a slot that you didn't particularly want, and you want to change it, or it may get to a week or so before your test and you feel like you're really not ready and you want to reschedule to a slightly later date. You can do that within your web account. If you can't see an available test slot, try looking at a different test centre, sort of maybe slightly further away. It might be worth travelling, another 20 minutes to get a better test slot. If you can't see anything that's suitable, don't worry. We do release new test slots periodically, quite regularly throughout the test cycle. So we do that in terms of managing capacity. We find that if we release all the test slots now, everybody books really early and they book for the very last week of testing. And that's not the kind of behaviour we want. It doesn't work. When new candidates come along who might have only just found out about the Ucat and they're trying to book a session, there's nothing left for the dates they need. So we do release them at regular intervals throughout the test cycle. So if you can't see a slot today, check back in a couple of days and there might be some new test slots released. If you're really struggling, give customer services a ring and they should be able to help you. We have had a few candidates contact us to say they couldn't find a test slot, and when I actually spoke to them, it turned out, they wanted a very particular test centre on one day. Well, you might have to compromise. So there are lots of test centres available, and have a look for a suitable test slot. Okay. Do you get several laminated sheets, or do you have to use a whiteboard, rubber? And how early should you arrive at the test centre? Really good questions. About 15 minutes before your test, we say you need to arrive, because there is a check-in process. Have a look at the test day page of the Ucat website. I'd say that's a pretty essential page to look at. So it talks to you about what ID you need. Each year we get about 400 candidates who get turned away from the test centre because they've brought incorrect ID. So make sure you're not one of them. 15 minutes before, if you arrive late, you will miss your test slot and they will not let you test. And that's because it's quite strict in terms of the timing. Somebody else will be due in the test slot after you, and they will miss their test if you've made them late. So you won't be allowed to test if you're late. It will go through what it's like at the test centre in terms of check-in. You have to put everything in a locker. So, you know, you have to take your watch off, your phone. You're not permitted jewellery. They might ask to check, you know, your hoodie or something. It's basically to protect the security of the test, to make sure there's no recording devices. Everything goes in a locker, and then you get it back at the end of the test. You'll get, I think it's 2 or 3 laminated sheets you get in the notebook, and an erasable marker pen. You don't get an eraser, so you can't erase it during the test. They will do that at the end because they inspect them. But if you run out, if you think you're running out of room or you've got really big writing, stick your hand up, attract the invigilator, and they will provide you with another set, an extra set. Even if you can't see the invigilator in the room, sometimes they're in the test room with you. Other times they will be outside the room and monitoring the test room on a screen. So even if you can't see somebody, stick your hand up and wave it around and somebody will assist you. Okay. For QR, is there a list of formulas we should memorise? Not especially, but I think the things I mentioned, ratios, fractions, percentages, averages, those are the things you really need to swat up on. There's one here. The Ucat booking opened before 9 AM and people who had booked after me had more options for the same slots the same day. When it available. Was it a systematic problem? No, it did open slightly early. So I think it was supposed to open at 9 AM and Pearson VUE opened it up a couple of hours early, but there was only a handful of candidates who booked who realised that and booked in those sessions. There are thousands of test slots. There are more released periodically throughout the test cycle, so you will be able to find a test slot. Please don't worry about that. Again, if you're struggling, give customer services a ring and they will help you. Okay. What books and resources are best to use? I think I covered this, but really, we recommend the official resources on the Ucat website. So I think I've mentioned there's tutorials on there, question banks and practice tests. If you use all of them, by all means look elsewhere, but that's where we would recommend that you start. In terms of books, we don't tend to get as many books as you used to maybe 5 years ago, and I think that's because people have realised it's better to prepare in the same sort of way that you will sit the live testing. So doing the questions on the screen, using a mouse, it's very different if you're doing it with the pen and paper out of a book. It's not really recreating the test experience. And some of the books might be quite old. We do change the test each year, so if you're using an older book, they might not have the current question types in them, so it is a bit risky using books, I think. When would you recommend taking the test in the testing period? Again, that's a really good question. So you've got 2 months, you can sit it at any point. I would say the kind of golden period is August, in my opinion. When you get into September, test slots are getting busier. If you encounter a problem, say you fall ill or you need to isolate for 7 or 10 days and you need to reschedule your test to later in the test cycle, further towards the end you book, the more problems you're going to have. Also in September, you're back in school in year 13 and you've got your UCAS application to deal with. You've got a lot of other things going on. So I wouldn't want really to be sitting it in September when I've got those pressures as well. So I would be looking at August as maybe sort of mid-late August is the best time to sit the test. Will everybody taking the UCAT get entirely different questions? No, we have about 30,000 people sit the test each year. So they don't see different questions. We do have different forms of the test, which are there for security reasons to kind of protect the integrity of the test. So if one is compromised, we can pull that, although that's never happened. So if you're sat in the test room, somebody sat next to you may not be taking the same form of the test. So some of the questions may be different and some may be presented in a different order. So there's different forms of the test. But you don't really need to worry about that. They are equivalent, obviously, all of them. Oh, somebody said I'm on mute. I'm not sure. I don't think I'm on mute.
No,
I think everybody can hear me. Are you all right?
Yeah, the audio is good.
Good. Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Will you get earbuds to wear so that the noise of other people moving doesn't distract you? Yeah, so it's important to understand it is very different to sitting an exam at school where you're in a large hall and everybody's sat there at the same time, coming in at the same time and leaving at the same time, and it's absolute silence. You know, it's not like that. So in our test centres, the rooms are obviously a lot smaller, and with social distancing, we've reduced capacity even more. So there will be somewhere between probably 5 and 15 people in the test room with you. They won't all be sitting UCAT. Some will be sitting their driving theory test. Some will be sitting contractor safety license. So they will be coming and going at different times. The invigilators will bring them in very, very quietly, sit them down and get their test started with the minimum amount of disruption. So they're used to doing that. Obviously, that's their job. But if you think you might find that distracting, you can request earplugs and headphones. They will offer those to you at the test centre. So if you think that will help you focus a bit more, then request those when you're at the test centre. Are there any other questions? Looking for abstract reasoning, is there a list of patterns that we should sort of memorise or be familiar with? Yes, there is. Have a look at the question tutorial on the prepare page of our website, and that runs through all the different kind of rules and patterns that you will see. If you Google it as well, you'll find loads of free videos on YouTube where candidates run through these sorts of things as well. So use a mnemonic that works for you to remember those rules and patterns. You will get quicker at spotting them the more practice questions you do. Oh, great. The person who couldn't hear me can hear me now. That's good. Great. Why is the test so time pressured? I mean, it's like any exam. Every exam would be easy if you had all the time in the world to do it. It's supposed to be difficult. You know, there's a reason you're sitting this test, and that is because there are simply so many applicants for medicine and dentistry. They are very competitive courses. This is another aspect that universities feel this test score measures different things to things like the BMAT and your academic grades, and it's looking at assessing those things. And you know, it is quite time pressured. Some aspects of healthcare are very time pressured. If you're working in A&E and you're presented with a candidate with multiple symptoms and you need to diagnose them quickly, things like that can be very crucial. So it's trying to put you into pressure. It is supposed to be difficult, but you will get through this. This is one part of your step towards medicine, dentistry. So although it feels really daunting now, it's just one aspect, and it is your opportunity to showcase what you can do. Were students usually doing both UCAT and BMAT at the same time for different medical school requirements? Okay, so BMATs usually run at 2 different times of the year. They usually offer a September sitting and a November sitting. Last year, because of COVID, they didn't run the September test. They just ran the November one, and they're doing the same this year. So the BMAT is just sat on one day, which is, I think, the 3rd of November. Please double check that, but I'm pretty sure they've just announced the date. So it's at a completely different time at the UCAT. So if you did want to apply to both UCAT and BMAT universities, you can do that. You can prepare for the UCAT over the summer and sit it in August and September, and then start revising for BMAT. So they are at different times. It is possible to want to. For SJT, will we get partial marks if our answers are close? For example, choosing appropriate but not ideal for a question when the answer is very appropriate. Yes. Some of the scoring is more complex than that. That's a bit of an oversimplification, but yes, you will pick up partial marks for those questions in that sense, yeah. Does everyone tend to complete the abstract reasoning section? I can't remember the current stats. We do look at this part each year to work out sort of how candidates are coping with the test. I think maybe something like 15% of candidates maybe don't get through all the questions within that subtest. I think it's something around 15–16%. For SJT, how are the scorings done? That's a really difficult question for me to answer in this section because it is very complex. So for the whole of the UCAT, you get raw scores, and then they're converted to scale scores, and then for the SJT, they're converted to banding. So it is quite complicated. What band do most students get for the SJT? Oh, don't quote me on this. Have a look at the test statistics page of our website. So we do publish that. So you can look at last year's test scores. It will tell you the average scores for each of the 4 subtests. And it will tell you there's a split of, 50% of candidates got a band 1, 50% got a band 2, however many got a band 3, and then maybe 10% got a band 4. Don't quote me those figures, they're not correct, but you can find that out on the test statistics page of the website. So what band do most students get? I think the majority get the band 2, but again, please check that. I think most candidates score a band 2. So in terms of universities that don't look at band 4s, really it is pulling out quite a small percentage of candidates and saying, yeah, we won't interview that percentage of candidates. But as I've mentioned, even if you did get a band 4, don't despair. There are some universities that don't look at the SJT at all as part of their UCAT screening. Can you use your UCAT score like you do your A-level results, or should you repeat if you need to the next year? Yes, so say you're not successful in getting an interview this year for medicine, and although that's not what you want to hear at the moment, it is a realistic possibility. They are such competitive courses, that's why they're so hard to get into. Some candidates don't get in first time, and it might be your UCAT score where you fall down, or it might be your interview or some other aspect. You would have to apply to your university again next year, and you would have to sit the UCAT again next year. So your UCAT score is only valid for the year in which you take it. Yeah, so hopefully that makes sense. And yeah, in that year, you would need to decide what you want to do. You might want to use it to get some more work experience and to kind of boost your attractiveness to your universities, or think of other ways you can improve your application. Sorry, what is SJT and what does it stand for? Don't apologise, that's me using jargon. So SJT is a situational judgment test. That's the 5th UCAT subtest. Sorry, so where I'm mentioning SJT, that's the shortened name for the situational judgment test. And I think the questions about drying up, and I think we're at the end of the session.
Yes. Thank you very much. I hope everyone else found it useful. I think if it's okay with you, if you don't have anything else to add, but end this session. There's one more question. I think you could answer that, and then we can end the session after that.
Okay. So last question: can you take breaks between the tests? Yes, there is a 1 minute. It's only 1 minute. There's 1 minute introductory screen, which is kind of a break between each subtest. So you can use that to kind of clear your head, maybe jot down any notes or a mnemonic or any fractions you memorize or anything like that. You can use that 1 minute between subtests to jot down any notes. So yeah, you can go to the toilet if you need to take a break or go to the toilet. You can do that, but the timer will keep ticking. So try and be organised and sort that sort of thing out before you get to the test centre or on arrival at the test centre when you check in. Okay, and thank you very much. There's been some brilliant questions there. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, thank you very much. I think if you could go to the speaker lounge, that's another hub. We'll start with the next session afterwards. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.